That winter came earlier than usual. Bitter winds swept through the small alley of a poor suburban neighborhood where Mr. James, Mrs. Sarah, and their two children, Lily and Tom, lived. Their dilapidated house stood dwarfed among the rusty tin roofs, like a pause in the bustling melody of urban life. Mr. James, a gentle man with calloused hands from years of working as a construction laborer, was crouching on the roof trying to repair a leak. The drizzle soaked through his thin clothes, but he didn't stop. He knew that if he didn't fix it, the family would endure more freezing nights. In the kitchen, Mrs. Sarah was struggling to light a fire in the old charcoal stove. It took nearly an hour before the flames caught. Lily, her eldest daughter, sat beside her, fanning the fire with a furrowed brow. "Mom, what are we eating tonight?" Lily asked. Mrs. Sarah forced a smile, concealing her worry. "There's still some rice and a few sweet potatoes. I'll make sweet potato porridge. You'll have to make do, dear." Tom, the 7-year-old boy, burst into the room holding a bundle of dry wood. "Mom, I found some firewood. Can you add a little salt to the porridge for me?" Seeing the hopeful sparkle in her son's eyes, Mrs. Sarah nodded gently. That night, the family gathered around a modest meal, a pot of watery porridge with a few slices of sweet potato. Mr. James gave his portion to the children, while Mrs. Sarah discreetly poured hers into Tom's bowl. Lily turned away to hide the tears welling in her eyes. 2 days later, a massive storm hit. The howling winds tore away the tin sheets Mr. James had secured. The family huddled together in a corner of the house, clinging to one another. Rainwater flooded in, soaking their worn-out mat. "Dad, Mom, will our house be swept away?" Lily whispered. Mr. James stroked her hair and spoke with a calming voice. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll protect you all." But fate was unkind. A large tree outside their home was uprooted, collapsing and destroying the main wall. The family fled to a neighbor's house, carrying only a small cloth bag with a few tattered clothes and Lily's notebook, where she recorded her dreams of a brighter future. When the storm passed, they returned to find their home uninhabitable. At that moment, a middle-aged man entered. It was Mr. Michael, their creditor. "Mr. James, it's time. When will you repay your debt?" he demanded. Mr. James lowered his head, his voice choked with despair. "Please, I need more time. My family has just endured a terrible storm." But Mr. Michael was unmoved. "If you can't pay, sell your land. Don't think you can run from this." Tears streamed down Mrs. Sarah's face as she clutched her children. Tom sobbed loudly while Lily bit her lip, her eyes filled with helplessness. In the midst of this despair, Mr. James received an offer from an old friend, a labor job at a construction site 50 kilometers away. Despite the grueling nature of the work, he accepted, hoping to earn enough money to repay the debt and rebuild their home. Mrs. Sarah took up sewing for hire, while Lily helped her after school. Though life was hard, the family leaned on one another, clinging to the hope of a better tomorrow. But would hope be enough to withstand the storms ahead? In the following days, Mr. James left for the construction site. Despite his age, he carried heavy sacks of cement and steel plates, pushing his body to the limit. Every evening, he sat under a dim light, calculating his earnings. His greatest hope was to provide his family with a sturdy home. Back home, Mrs. Sarah and the children worked tirelessly. At just 14, Lily took on babysitting jobs for a wealthy family to contribute to the household income. She quietly sacrificed her study time, hiding her sadness to avoid upsetting her mother. One morning, as Mr. James was working, the scaffolding suddenly collapsed. Screams rang out as dust filled the air. Mr. James was trapped beneath the rubble, his work shirt soaked in blood. His co-workers rushed him to the hospital. The doctors diagnosed a broken leg requiring immediate surgery, but the cost was beyond what the family could afford. When Mrs. Sarah received the news, she was devastated. She desperately sought loans, but the money she gathered wasn't enough. Mr. Michael appeared again, colder than before. "If you can't pay, I'll take your land," he sneered. Mrs. Sarah begged through her tears. "Please give us more time. My husband is in the hospital." Mr. Michael laughed cruelly. "Don't blame me. Life is harsh." Just as all seemed lost, a strange man appeared at the hospital. He introduced himself as Mr. Allen, an old acquaintance of Mr. James. Yet something in his demeanor unsettled Mrs. Sarah. Mr. Allen entered Mr. James's hospital room, his eyes filled with resentment. "I never thought I'd see you like this. Have you forgotten the debt from years ago?" he said coldly. Mr. James paled, stammering, "Allen, please don't mention it in front of my family." What was this secret? Mrs. Sarah didn't know, but she felt it had the power to upend everything. After the encounter, Mr. Allen made an offer to Mrs. Sarah. "I'll clear your family's debt if you sell me the notebook Lily always carries." Mrs. Sarah was stunned. "That notebook is just my daughter's diary. It's worthless. Why do you want it?" Mr. Allen smiled cryptically. "You don't need to know. Just agree, and your husband's debt will disappear." Mrs. Sarah stood at a crossroads. Save her family or protect something precious to her daughter. To her, the notebook seemed more than a keepsake. It held an unknown significance. As Mrs. Sarah hesitated, Lily overheard the conversation. She stepped forward, holding her mother's hand, and said firmly, "Mom, let me decide. If my notebook can save our family, I'm willing to give it up." But as soon as the notebook was handed over, Mr. Allen disappeared without fulfilling his promise. Days later, an anonymous letter arrived, revealing that the notebook contained crucial evidence about Mr. James's past and in the debt he was burdened with. What secrets did the notebook hold? Could the family endure the truths that were about to unravel? In the days following Mr. Allen's disappearance with the notebook, Mr. James's family lived in constant unease. Mrs. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Allen's words, and Lily began to question the secrets her parents had always kept from her. Mr. James, after recovering slightly, decided to reveal part of the truth. On a quiet night, he called Mrs. Sarah and Lily to his bedside, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry for making the family suffer, but that notebook doesn't just belong to you, Lily. It's tied to a significant incident from my past." Mr. James confessed that over 20 years ago, as a young man, he had accidentally caused a car accident that led to a man's death. Panicking, he fled the scene. That man turned out to be Mr. Allen's older brother. Later, Mr. Allen found him and forced him to sign a substantial debt agreement as compensation. However, instead of using the money to support the victim's family, Mr. Allen turned it into a tool to exploit Mr. James for his own gain. "That notebook is the only evidence exposing Mr. Allen's greed," Mr. James said, choking on his words. Lily looked at her father, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe that the man she had always respected carried such a dark secret. As the family struggled to cope with the emotional weight, another letter from Mr. Allen arrived. In it, he demanded that Lily meet him alone at a secret location if she didn't want the truth about Mr. James's past to be revealed. Lily decided to go alone without telling her parents. When she arrived, she was led into a dark room where only Mr. Allen and a small table stood. On the table was her notebook. "Lily, you're a smart girl. Don't you want to know the full truth about your family?" Mr. Allen said with a sly smile. Lily trembled but tried to stay calm. "What do you want?" Mr. Allen placed a stack of papers on the table. "Sign this. Sell your family's land to me, and I'll leave your family alone." Lily stared at the papers, her heart torn. If she signed, her family would lose their only home. But if she refused, her father would continue living under constant threat. Just as Lily was about to pick up the pen, a loud knock echoed through the room. An elderly woman entered, holding a thick folder in her hands. She introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson, the wife of the man who had died in the accident years ago. "Mr. Allen, that's enough. I know everything. My brother is gone, but I would never want to use someone else's misfortune for revenge." It turned out that Mrs. Thompson had known about the incident for years, but had never spoken up. She brought evidence exposing Mr. Allen's exploitation of her family's tragedy to blackmail Mr. James. Mr. Allen turned pale, but before he could react, Mrs. Thompson called the police. At the police station, all the evidence was presented. Mr. Allen was found guilty not only of exploiting Mr. James's family, but also of defrauding many others to amass his wealth. Lily's small notebook became the critical piece of evidence to seal his fate. After Mr. Allen's arrest, Mr. James's family thought they could finally breathe a sigh of relief, but their troubles were far from over. One day, Mrs. Sarah discovered a letter hidden under Mr. James's pillow. The letter not only detailed more about the debt, but also mentioned a mysterious woman named Linda. who seemed to have a significant connection to Mr. James. Mrs. Sarah confronted her husband. "Who is Linda? Why is she involved in this debt?" Mr. James turned pale and stammered. "Linda, she's someone I loved before I met you, but it's all in the past." However, Mrs. Sarah's intuition told her there was more to the story. She began investigating in secret, and what she uncovered was even more shocking than she could have imagined. Linda, the woman mentioned in the letter, unexpectedly appeared at Mr. James's house. She was a sharp, wealthy, and influential woman. Linda revealed that she was the one behind Mr. Allen's attempts to force Mr. James's family to repay their debts. She claimed it was her way of reclaiming what she believed Mr. James owed her, the happy life he had taken away. Linda smirked, looking directly into Mrs. Sarah's eyes. "Didn't he tell you about me? He once promised to stay with me forever, but then left without a word." Mrs. Sarah was stunned, while Mr. James could only bow his head in silence. Linda made a shocking demand. Mrs. Sarah must leave Mr. James. If not, she would expose the entire truth about his past, destroying their family once and for all. Mrs. Sarah was heartbroken. Not only did she have to confront the betrayal of her trust, but she also had to choose between keeping her family intact or protecting her own dignity. Before leaving, Linda revealed another unsettling truth. The notebook Lily cherished had once belonged to her. It contained entries about her days of loving Mr. James, along with a secret that could entirely change how Lily viewed her father. Lily began to doubt her father. She confronted him, demanding he tell her the whole truth. At last, Mr. James confessed. He had exploited Linda's feelings to escape a massive debt in the past. Just as the family descended into chaos, their makeshift home was suddenly set ablaze by an unknown arsonist. All of their meager belongings were destroyed in the fire. The family not only lost their shelter, but also their last hopes of starting over. Police investigations revealed that Linda was behind the incident. However, by the time they searched for her, she had disappeared without a trace. Following the fire, Mr. James's family was forced to move into a dilapidated rental house on the outskirts of the city. Their already difficult life became even more desperate. Lily, despite her young age, decided to drop out of school to help support the family. But what the family didn't expect was that from this moment, even more terrifying challenges would begin to emerge. One day, Mrs. Sarah received a photograph of their family with a chilling message written on it. "If you don't want everything to disappear, return what you've taken." The photo terrified Mrs. Sarah. Someone was clearly watching their family. Mr. James recognized the handwriting. It was Linda's. Although Linda had disappeared, she was still orchestrating everything from the shadows. A few days later, Linda unexpectedly appeared at the family's rundown rental house, this time with a shocking demand. "I don't need money. I want Lily to come with me and become my successor." The family was horrified by her proposal. Linda continued, emphasizing her point. "Lily is a smart girl and deserves a bright future. If you let her live in poverty, that's the real crime." Lily hesitated. A part of her longed to escape the darkness of her current life for something better, but she couldn't abandon her parents. Linda didn't wait for an answer. She began applying pressure. The family's old debts suddenly skyrocketed to an unpayable amount. Mrs. Sarah was threatened by strange men at the marketplace. Unable to bear seeing her family suffer, Lily went to Linda on her own and accepted her demand. Lily moved into Linda's mansion, a place filled with wealth but devoid of warmth. Linda treated Lily more like a pawn than a child. She started training Lily and running a business while subtly planting seeds of vengeance in her mind. "Lily, your father destroyed my life. Would you like to know everything he's done to me?" Lily became entangled in the stories Linda told. Gradually, resentment towards her father grew, and she even considered severing all ties with her family. Mr. James, unable to accept his daughter being manipulated by Linda, sought a way to confront her. When he finally faced Linda, he knelt before her. "Linda, I beg you, let my daughter return home. I'll do anything you ask." But Linda responded with a cold smile. "Can you return my youth and my future? If not, don't say another word." She went even further, issuing a grave threat. "If you dare to come near Lily again, I will make sure your entire family disappears forever." One day, Lily sneaked into Linda's private room and discovered old photographs along with a diary detailing all of Linda's schemes. Lily was shocked to realize that Linda never intended to help her or her family, but only sought to use her as a tool for revenge. Lily decided to confront Linda. "Why would you do this? I trusted you." Linda looked at Lily, her gaze cold and bitter. "Trust. The only thing worth trusting in this world is power and money. If you don't understand that, you'll be crushed by others, just like your family." Determined to escape, Lily began planning her getaway. However, Linda, with her ruthless nature, discovered her plans and ordered her men to stop Lily. During a dangerous chase, Lily was nearly caught but was ultimately rescued by a mysterious man. This man introduced himself as William, Mrs. Thompson's brother, who had once helped Mr. James's family. He vowed to protect Lily and bring her back to her family. Upon learning of Lily's escape, Linda lost her composure. She decided to play her strongest card, exposing Mr. James's dark past to the public, completely destroying the family's reputation. Within days, stories about Mr. James spread everywhere. The rumors, exaggerated and twisted, painted him as a deceitful and treacherous man who deserved to be ostracized by society. The family was entirely isolated. Those who had once supported them turned their backs, leaving them in despair. In their darkest hour, Mrs. Thompson, the wife of the man Mr. James had accidentally harmed years ago, reappeared. This time she brought a gift, an old audio recording. The tape contained a message from Linda's brother before his death. In it, he admitted that his death wasn't entirely Mr. James's fault. He even left a message for Linda. "Live with kindness. Don't let hatred blind you." After hearing the recording, Lily resolved to confront Linda one last time. She went to Linda's mansion, armed with the tape and her newfound courage. "You can continue to seek revenge on my family, but it will only bring you more pain. You think my father ruined your life, but it's your hatred that's destroying you." Linda listened silently, her expression unreadable. In that moment, a part of her seemed to waver. But before she could decide on her next move, an unexpected betrayal unfolded. One of Linda's closest associates had secretly conspired with one of her old enemies to seize her entire fortune. Linda found herself in grave danger, barely escaping an assassination attempt in her own mansion. Despite everything Linda had done to her, Lily couldn't stand by and watch. She helped Linda escape and worked with her to unravel the conspiracy. Linda and Lily were forced to put aside their differences and collaborate. They discovered that the mastermind behind the betrayal was a former friend of Linda's, someone she had once exploited and abandoned. During their journey, Linda began to confront her mistakes. She realized she hadn't just hurt Mr. James's family, but had also created numerous enemies through her selfishness and bitterness. When the dust settled, Linda returned to face Mr. James. She knelt before him, tears streaming down her face. "I was wrong. I can't undo the past, but I hope to make amends for my mistakes." Mr. James, despite his pain, chose to forgive her. He said, "Hatred never brings peace. Live a new life for the brother you lost." Lily returned home, carrying new hope and faith. Despite their continued poverty, Mr. James's family had regained their peace. The community, upon learning the truth from Mrs. Thompson's recording, began to open their hearts and offer help once again. Linda sold all her assets and used the money to compensate the families she had harmed, including Mr. James's family. She left the city, choosing to live a simple and peaceful life in a distant place. The story closes with an image of Mr. James's family gathered around a modest meal, filled with laughter. They realize that true wealth isn't measured by material possessions, but by the love and understanding shared between people. Lily held her parents' hands and smiled. "No matter how hard life gets, our family will always stand together." This emotional story leaves us with 3 profound lessons. 1. Forgiveness is strength. Hatred only brings more pain, while forgiveness paves the way for new beginnings. 2. Kindness always triumphs. In every hardship, love and compassion are what help us persevere. 3. Family is the ultimate haven. Whether in poverty or sorrow, family is always the place to return to. Thank you for watching. If the story, The Last Meal of a Poor Family, touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to never miss other meaningful and humane stories. Like this video to spread the message of love and sharing to more people. Share this video to inspire your friends, family, and community. Your subscription and support are a tremendous motivation for us to continue delivering heartfelt stories that help us cherish the values of love and kindness. Let's build a warm community together where beautiful stories can be shared and celebrated. Thank you so much.